The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for giving up some of your Friday afternoon for a very short webinar to give you an introduction to the outcomes of the Inspiration Horizon 2020 project and to give you an indication of what is in the strategic research agenda that we've developed to look at the topic of sustainable spatial planning, land use and soil management. My name is Paul Nathaniel. I'm part of the core group of the Inspiration Project, and I'm joined by Stefan Bartke, who has been coordinating the project for us from Germany, from the Umweltbundesamt. Without further ado, I'm going to carry on with the slides. I'm just letting you know that the session is being recorded, and you'll be sent a link to the recording when we finished. If you have any questions, please either type them into the chat box, the question box, or drop either Stefan or myself an email afterwards. We will pass on your contact details to colleague in BRGM who can also send you a copy of the slides that I'm using for you to look at and share with any of your own colleagues. So, a bit of background about where Inspiration came from. It emerged from a call under Societal Challenge number 5, and the challenge there was about developing a low-carbon, resource-efficient economy that is based on a supply of raw materials that is long-term sustainable. And within that challenge, there's a particular call to look at how we structure research on soil, land use and land management across Europe. Within that call, there was a need to coordinate research that is carried out in different parts of Europe and is therefore fragmented, to find ways of getting more people involved collaboratively and in a more coherent way so that the research can have a bigger impact on that low carbon resource efficient economy. The main focus was to create dialogue between different European stakeholders, scientists, funders and end users to agree what the priorities for research are and therefore help target the funding for those kind of research projects. One of my favorite professors when I was a young student said, research isn't finished until it is written up and published in a scientific journal. Well, these days, even that isn't enough, and you've got to make an impact. The research has to make a difference to the way that we do things. Research includes creating new knowledge, transferring that knowledge from one area of application to another, uptake of that knowledge by practitioners, demonstrating its value and its applicability, and then ultimately making it good practice through the publication of codes and standards. And much of what Inspiration has identified as a need straddles that spectrum from creation right the way through to making it normal and routine. Why do we need this new knowledge? Well, Margot de Kleen from the Netherlands talked about the need for a new knowledge if you're going to change the way you approach soil. Soil serves a variety of different functions. It offers us a variety of different services, but it is not well enough understood yet for us to be able to manage it most effectively. And that which is not understood is difficult to come up with valid policies, practices, and then the implementation of those practices. So how did we work out what we needed to know? Well, Inspiration took a very democratic bottom-up approach. It began at the beginning with talking to over 500 scientists and end users across Europe including funders of research and citizen groups, to identify in each of the countries that are participating in Inspiration what the national research and innovation demands are. That exercise resulted in over 2,000 individual research calls, and they were synthesized into 4 clusters. I'll come on in a minute and explain what those clusters are. They were then prioritized and ultimately presented in a strategic research agenda that's been the basis of the matchmaking we've tried to do between funders. So this bottom-up approach is absolutely central to the way that we've gone about identifying research needs. This is an example of the kind of resolution and detail that came from the UK. The picture in the middle shows you a group of us working hard here in Nottingham, where I'm based, capturing flip charts. And what's not shown in the picture is the number of interviews that were conducted one-to-one with key people in the sector. And that was duplicated across Europe. That work, the work that resulted in 2,000 or so research needs that was then analysed. It was analysed and distilled down into 22 thematic needs, clustered into 4 topics: the demand on natural capital and ecosystem services, the availability of that natural capital, the way that we manage land by drawing on that natural capital, meeting the demand, and then looking at how well we understand the overall impact of our activities at the local, regional, and global scale. So under those 4 themes, we've ended up with 22 areas where research is needed. Now, in addition, there were 17 research needs identified that cut across those themes. This slide hides the details. It just gives you the main headline topics. Just to pick a couple, we've got emerging contaminants, the impacts of climate change, the need to keep our soils fertile, and to look at how we value ecosystem services in this particular context in agricultural land uses. And so we grouped those integrated needs into 4 categories, one going from knowledge, data and information to practice. The second one looking at the need to analyze both demand, potential capacity and the risks posed by the way we call on natural resources. The challenge of managing the urban environment. Increasingly around the world, the population is becoming more urbanized, and some cities are growing, some are shrinking, some are getting taller, some are sprawling. There's an increasing recognition that we need to take a circular approach to land in the same way as we are to the economy as a whole. And the concept of urban metabolism, looking at the supply, consumption or use, and then outcomes of different energy, material uses in cities. There's a recognition that we have a legacy of disturbed landscapes, contamination, instability, and so on. And then finally, and perhaps really this ought to have been at the very top, but the overarching challenge of dealing with a changing climate, more intense weather patterns, and how we're going to deal with those. So the outcome is a strategic research agenda, and I'll tell you in a couple of minutes how to access that. But that has really helped us go out and talk with funders across the 17 countries that were in Inspiration and try and see where their priorities, where their institutional priorities map onto, coincide with the strategic research agenda. And then we're looking for funders in different countries who have similar interests to see whether they would like to get together and collaboratively fund projects that will address the research needs we've identified. Now, in the background to all this was the publication of the Sustainable Development Goals by the United Nations. These were published after we began our work, but we very early on realized that our research needs map onto these SDGs, and the SDGs are central to the way that the European Commission is thinking about its budget allocation over the coming decade. So the key sustainable development goals that our research needs address are 6, 11, 13, 14, and 15. 6 is looking to deliver clean water and sanitation, 11 on sustainable cities and communities, 13 on climate action, 14, 15 on life below water and life on land. Now, we also think that there is a contribution to be made to the SDGs 1 through 12, and we're really struggling with 16 and 17. But it's important to realize that we feel there is value to be had in terms of carrying out the inspiration research if we're serious about wanting to try and achieve the SDG. Of course, this needs resource, this needs funding, and we've identified a number of different funding models, some of which will be familiar, but perhaps stretched or being cut back. Sources of international funding, bilateral funding between different countries. There's obviously the European dimension, Framework 9, the JPIs and so on. There's a lot of national funding in some countries, but not in others. We're seeing the recognition of public-private collaboration on research. A particular example from here in the UK is something called Innovate UK to help organisations move up the technology readiness level. The third sector, the philanthropic sector, that has been very supportive of research that will support social justice, environmental justice and environmental protection. And then finally, crowdfunding, where there is no obvious large funder, but lots of small sums of money can be aggregated to achieve a bigger project. In terms of moving forward, the project finishes at the end of February, and what we're now working on is a funders platform to help implement the strategic research agenda. The idea is that this will be a cross-national platform of funders who will hopefully have identified that their funding priorities have something in common and who are willing to collaborate to develop calls for co-funded research proposals. Over the next 18 months, the partners within Inspiration have agreed to continue to act as national contacts. We will liaise with each other and we'll share information with you, our national stakeholders, and in particular funders, so that the fragmented picture that was identified at the call stage is overcome and is reduced. There is an online version of the strategic research agenda, and there's a database to allow you to search for your priorities and record your interest in specific activities. So my final slide, I said this was going to be a short presentation, is to acknowledge the contribution of the European Union and also the many partners from across Europe who've been instrumental in gathering those research needs and distilling them into something that is relatively succinct and transparent. So with that, I'd like to close my time of talking and take any questions that you may have. You can type your questions into the question panel in the webinar box or the webinar interface now. In the UK, if there is an auction, we give people 3 chances. So I'm going to give you a count of 3 if there are any questions. If there aren't now, then look out for an email with the link to the recording. And as I said, I will pass your email contacts on to BRGM, who will email you with the copy of the slides. Aha, I have. How is inspiration linked to the joint program on soil? We've been liaising with a wide number of organisations to bring their knowledge and their awareness of the strategic research agenda. And what we're hoping is that the ideas that we've come up with, that we've reported, will be taken up and put into action by as many partners as possible. In my ideal world, I'd like in 2 or 3 years' time to go to a conference and see somebody presenting a project which I recognise as coming from inspiration, that's been funded by another body. And so the ideas are there for people to take and use and support as they wish to. So I hope that answers that particular question. There's a reminder that in about 10 minutes, we've got another webinar that focuses much more on how to get involved. So if you're a funder in particular, then in about 10 minutes time or so, at 1:30, there'll be a chance to look at some more detail of that funders platform and the period between March 2018 and August 2019. So any more questions? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. So I'd like to thank you very much indeed for your attention this afternoon. Have a good afternoon and a good weekend. And as I said, look out for a link to the recording and then an email from BRGM with a copy of the slides. And hopefully see some of you at 1:30 for the next webinar. Thank you.